Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation is really dedicated to preserving, protecting, and presenting our Science of Mind history, anchoring in our roots, to anchoring into our roots of our history and who we are and how we got to where we are today, and setting the stage for moving forward for tomorrow.
Well, hello, and hi everybody on Facebook Live. I know that there's folks watching from all over, so that's really wonderful, and that this is being recorded and held in as part of our legacy. And I thought it would be a good idea to do this Wise Sage interview in a special way. So Dr. Kenn, why don't you come on up here? The interview process is standardized, although for this particular situation, we've modified it a bit. But in general, these are the questions that we ask anyone who is participating in one of these interviews. Okay, so tell us about your early life, where and when you were born, the origins of your family, how many siblings you have, and religious background before coming into this teaching.
Well, I was born in Vancouver, British Columbia. In 1952, and I had two sisters, one passed on, but I have two sisters and one brother.
Mm-hmm. And any religious background before coming into Science of Mind that you care to share?
Funny enough, I was raised in the United Church of Canada, which was not the United Church of Religious Science. It was a Methodist Lutheran joining together that they did in the small towns in Canada. So we weren't the first integration that ever took place, because the Methodists and the Lutherans did in order to be able to form and build churches in Canada. And it was a very, very liberal religion, unlike the Anglican religion down the street. We were considered to be religious light. So,
okay.
And my mother was the Sunday school teacher at the church when I was growing up. And so actually I went to Sunday school just about every Sunday until I was about 12, 13 years old, I think. And I went with my mom. And the only time I got away from not going to church on Sunday was when my father decided he was going to go fishing, and he would wake me up and take me fishing. And so that was pretty much what my upbringing was. I will mention, though, that when I was about, 7 or 8 years old, I got an opportunity to do delivery from the pulpit there as a child speaker at our church. And little did I know what it portended for the future, but there you go.
Yeah, you got to become a heathen and later speak, right?
That's right. That's right. You know, my dad never went to church. I mentioned my mom went every Sunday. My father, though, he didn't. He pretty much went on Easter and Christmas, and that was about the extent of it. And he was raised by my grandparents in Vancouver, and he was definitely a panentheist, without question. And I can remember he took me out fishing one day, and I was about 5 years old, and we were on the Similkameen River in British Columbia. And he used to take me at 5, and he'd have a sleeping bag in the back of his trunk of his car, and he'd have his fly rods there and his hunting knife. And if my mom caught us in time, she would jam a can of beans or a sandwich in my pocket. But we would go out for 2 or 3 days, and he'd catch everything in the wilderness, and we'd cook it, and we'd eat from there. So my earliest memory of spirit, or asking a question of spirit, was my father and I, and he'd cut down some pine boughs and laid them down and put a sleeping bag on it. And we were on the Similkameen River. You could hear the river roaring, and it was a nice summer day or summer night, and the stars were out. I can remember that. And I was 5, and he took me, and I would sleep with him in the sleeping bag. He would just hold on to me. And I can remember asking him, what is God? And I'll tell you what he told me. He said, it's funny that you should ask me that question, because I remember very clearly asking your granny the same question. And he said, what Granny told me was that, Bobby, God is everything. God is the grass. God is the trees. God is the flowers. God is your dog Queenie. God is the cactus plant on the windowsill. And when he said that, then he said, and my problem was that I thought she said that God was the cactus plant on the windowsill. And I was really happy with that until the cactus plant was gone one day. And he said, God is the totality of what you see. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom there. That's very nice.
Yeah, and I remember it. It's funny, I don't remember that much from being 5 years old. I remember 3 years old driving my tricycle down 6 flights of stairs. But I have the scars to remind me.
Well, that's okay. So tell us how you were introduced to the science of mind, and what point in your life did that occur?
Oh gosh, we've told that story so many times. Deb and I had moved to Southern California and began farming. I was in the corporate world before that, and I just had an absolute burnout, as a matter of fact. One day I woke up and went to work, and I discovered I had one brown shoe on and one black shoe on, and I'd kind of determined that it was time I got out of that particular line of work. And so I remember we went down to visit Deb's parents, who were living as expats in Palm Springs area. And my father-in-law had bought a ranch down south of there in Indio Thermal area, just north of the Mexican border. And we went down and we ended up farming. We ended up eventually owning the farm and running the farm down there. And one day my daughter, who was probably 6 years old at the time, was looking for Sunday school. And she came and she said, I want to know more about this Jesus guy. And I can remember Deb and I went into a flurry to find a church to take her to. And we ended up, through a friend of Deb's that she was leading brownies with, we ended up at the Religious Science Church of the Desert with Tom Costa. And the first time we went, as a matter of fact, Raymond Charles Barker was the speaker, and I hated him. Second time we went, Dr. Tom was speaking, and actually what I liked and most attracted me to it was he remembered my name. But I think that we really got attached to it when we began to take classes. And our opening Science of Mind 100 class had 150 people in it. And if you can believe it, Deb and I sat in that group for 32 weeks and took those courses, and I can't remember ever saying a word. We just sat there quietly listening, taking notes. And when it came time for second year, during the breaks, we'd gone back and we'd met all these fantastic people. And, we were farming in Southern California in a little bit of a redneck world. And I can remember we just fell in love with the people, but we didn't know them very well. So when it came time to sign up for our second year, we did in a minute. And that's the year we sort of began to break out and talk to people and make friends. And some of the friends that we had in Palm Desert are still our friends today. They've been lifelong friends. It's been fantastic. But the teaching made so much sense. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room has said that when you first heard it, it was like, I'm home again. And that's exactly what we felt and what we thought. And it didn't take us very long to get going on that. We were only in it for about 4 weeks, and we ended up going to Asilomar, which was a transformational period for both of us. It was incredible, and I was really wrapped tightly in those days. And I remember that a minister by the name of John McCormick gave the opening meditation, and it was in one of the rooms that were off at Asilomar. And I can remember going to the meditation, and I only went because it was a cheap holiday, and Deb made sure I went to everything. But we went to this meditation. I can remember sitting there, and he did this beautiful meditation about release and letting go. And we are being taped, so I'll be careful what I say. To be quite honest, halfway through the meditation, I had to jump up and run out of the room because was letting go of everything. All of a sudden, my stomach was upset. I was throwing up. It was incredible. And so I spent the first 18 hours of Asilomar not feeling very well. And so that was the first time I'd ever gone to a practitioner. So I went to a practitioner room and got prayer work done. And within hours, I was back solid again. And it was a life-transforming experience to be there. And if you'd asked me, even when I was in practitioner training, if I was a religious scientist, I would have told you I wasn't. I would have told you I was a Costaite. I was there because I was madly and passionately in love with our teacher. And it was only after I'd become a practitioner that I really began to realize there was a bigger organization, there was something larger that was happening, and began to get the energy of what it would be to have, instead of just 800 people at the Palm Desert Church at the time, to suddenly realize that it's possible to have 500,000 people carrying that consciousness in the world. And that was a transformative idea as well. And I remember to this day talking to Tom, Dr. Tom, about it, and I can remember showing up, and the first time I ever gave the treatment from the podium in Palm Desert, which was a big deal, by the way. The first time I ever did that, I walked up to the podium and I said, "Hi, my name's Kenn Gordon and I'm a religious scientist." And Dr. Tom broke into tears in the front row. So I started off actually listening to Baba Ram Dass when I was still in university. And I'd been majoring in philosophy at university, but I never knew that you could apply it. For me, it was all intellectual information. And so I never connected how you put it into your life as much as just having information, historical data to know. And it was really Science of Mind that did that. And when I bumped into Richard Alpert or Baba Ram Dass through a tape series, I really began to resonate with it. And obviously, by the time we found the church in Palm Desert, it was the same language, it was the same story.
How did Science of Mind change your life? And was there one specific event or demonstration that was a turning point for you to commit deeper into the teaching?
Yeah, Dr. Kennedy Schultz told us once that to be a good minister, you need two things. The first thing you need is an entrepreneurial spirit, and the second thing you need is a transformational healing that comes through the teaching. And I've got to be honest, the transformational healing for both Deb and I was so gradual that I never really noticed it. Do you know what I'm saying? We started out here, and there was nothing wrong. We were healthy, whole, and complete. We were farming. We were doing well in our lives. And it just kind of, over a period of 4 or 5 years, just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And I never really realized the impact it had on my life until I was preparing to leave Palm Desert to go start our own center. And I sat down to write a letter to Dr. Tom. And what I found the letter really awakened me to was the transformational healing that I'd had. And in it, what I did was I documented all the different healings that I'd witnessed in other people through the teaching over the 5 or 6 years that we were in the desert. Yeah, I can remember, we were part of a You Can Heal Your Life course that I participated in, and we would heal people of cancer. And we were doing this great work that was happening. And I could witness it all for other people. And I went through it. And in the letter, I documented all that. And then it occurred to me, and I said, basically this. And of all the healings that I've ever seen that took place in this church since we ran into it, the greatest healing we had was for Deb and I. And there was nothing wrong with us when we came in. It was an awakening and an awareness that took place. And so I can't say I threw down my crutches and walked. What I can say is there was a gradual transformation within myself that broadened my horizons to see that this joyous thing we call life is just waiting for us to embrace it. And that was my transformational healing.
Great. What year did you become a practitioner, and then what year a minister?
Oh, God.
You may have to refer back.
I became a minister in 1993.
93, yeah.
I must have become a practitioner in 1989 or 1990. 1990, I think, because we took our courses really quick. I think we took 1 year out between practitioner and ministerial then was 2 years for us. So
Yeah.
I think it would have been 1990.
Okay, thank you. So tell us a little bit about the Kelowna Center and the founding of that.
Okay. We received our calling, and it came from a gentleman by the name of Reverend Lloyd Klein, who phoned me up and said, will you come and start a church in Kelowna? He was from about 35 miles away. And we said yes and ran up to Kelowna and started. And we had 8 people on our first Sunday, of which 6 of them were my relatives. But we stuck with it. And it became a great church. It is a great church. We, in the early days, it wasn't uncommon for us to have 60 students and 40 people showing up for Sunday service. So we were definitely geared more to teaching, and our classes were very, very active. And I'll tell you, if you're starting a center, the way to do it is get your students involved and start teaching them, and then they become the congregants, then they invite their friends, then you grow from there. But our education is so tremendous, and it is the way to develop. And I understand with the internet and everything else that's going on that our education is in a transformational time of its own. But I'll tell you, this teaching is a teaching that draws and connects people and bonds people together and creates entire synergies in the activity and the action of doing it. We grew up to the point where we were doing about 300 on a Sunday showing up in attendance, and that's when I became spiritual leader. So it's diminished somewhat since then, but it is still one of the centers which has one of the strongest foundations. It's always operated in the black. It always has taught religious science and science of mind and literally nothing else. We're very adamant about that. And it's a beautiful center, and I'm glad that we started it. And it's my life's work. I retired from it last November, although Deborah still gets me to speak once a month up until now. We'll see what happens. Yeah. But I still go every Sunday, and so it's a great place to be.
Good. Okay, we're going to get into the time as spiritual leader now, and also.
Why do you lean forward and make it sound ominous?
Because.
Okay.
I just needed to read something, but I'm not going to do it in exactly the order of the questions that are here. I want to put it in a little context, because the first thing that happened in your leadership was coming on to the RSI board. So when you first came onto the board at RSI, so tell us a little bit about that. What was going on in the movement and in the organization at that point? Was that 1999?
Yeah, we graduating in 1993, we came into Religious Science International. I can't speak for our brothers and sisters in United because I wasn't very aware of what was going on there. But we were teaching in absolute turmoil because we were at that crossroads where transformational change was taking place in society, and we had to change with it. I mean, you and I and Deb came in an autocratic time. It was the time of the king and the queen. And so we entered, and it felt quite unfair. And my graduating class in 93, we literally would have little meetings and say, how are we going to transform this? Because I'll share with you, all change comes from within. And you can't get upset with what your organization looks like and then run away and expect it to change. What it demands is that you actually get involved and do the transformation from within, and that you actually be proactive with it and not withhold and withdraw and take off, which at that time a lot of that was happening in RSI. Talk about transformational times. Like tomorrow night I'm going to talk about the turn. That was a turning point. And when Dr. Candace went into power as the president, it was astronomical in the way that it changed. Because remember, I told you it was very autocratic beforehand. And I can remember the first night with Dr. Candace, with her backstage. I was getting ready to speak, and there was a relatively new minister who was going to give the opening treatment, who was having stage jitters at Merrill Hall. And I can remember looking over, and believe me, I knew how in the old days it would have been handled. It would have been handled, pull your socks up, get out there and quit whining. And instead I see Candace holding this minister and hugging her, going back.
Yeah. Big
change.
Yes. So then, is it 2008?
7.
You became president of RSI. Tell us about that.
Well, Candace was president for 4 years, and that was really the visioning bridge that was taking place with United with regard to integration. There was a lot of things that were going on, and we let go of our general manager at the office and things like that. And so it was a hubbub of movement and activity, and things were changing. And like any time things change, things were popping up all over the place. And I don't know, I just kind of always knew that that's what would happen. And so in 2007, I got elected president. And I've got to laugh because, Candace always had a picture of her grandchildren in front of her when she ran the business meetings. We didn't run the business meetings like we do here. They were done by Robert's rules, and they were called the Congress. And believe me, it was tight. And so she always put pictures of her grandchildren in front of her when she did it. And that particular year at the business meeting, her last year when she stepped down and I became the president, I brought a picture of my grandchild who was in utero at the time. So it was an ultrasound picture of him. So
Well, that'll ground you when you're dealing with tell us a little bit about what was going on with the integration process, as you were the president during the final years leading into that.
Yeah.
And
it was pretty much, it appeared to be stalled from the outside. And I was on the outside because I wasn't part of the visioning team as a vice president. I went to a couple of meetings, one in Seaside. I think that integration really took off when Dr. Cathy came to me when I was a president and said, I just got reelected for 4 more years. Do you remember that? And she said, I think maybe perhaps this is something that I'd like to do in the next 4 years. And that's when we really started to take off and move, once we had that agreement, because I was always in favor of it. So, and that's when it happened.
Yeah.
So it's all her.
And around that time, the branding was happening, and there was just a lot going on.
Yeah, we did branding, we did the name change. The name change itself was astronomical. There were people who said that we would change our name over my dead body, and they were all dead at that time. And we did. And, we did do that transformation and change in the thing. And I'm serious. I am.
That's actually true, yeah.
Yeah, and so, it was, the old school was really, really balking and fighting. You need to know something, though, is the person who started this whole integration thing is in this room tonight. The person who really, really began it. And, to show the success of it is, if you ask now, just about everybody participated in integration that was around at that time. But I'll tell you, that's not true in the early days. This guy wrote a letter to both the leadership of United and the leadership of International. And that's how he got on the board. Walker always believed in keeping his enemies close and his friends far away. And so Jim had written this letter after we did a joint conference in Phoenix.
Scottsdale.
Yeah, in Scottsdale. And we'd come out of that, and Jim was moved to write this letter and say, why aren't we together? Because the field, everybody was like, it's such a no-brainer, why aren't we doing this? And it was the leadership on both sides that was kind of balking and fighting with it. And so when he wrote the letter, what he did was he did what he does so well. He knocked the hornet's nest off the tree, and then we started to really go with the hive, so to speak.
And thus began a 9-year conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But then, do you think that we dare tell about Carlton going down and visiting with Fred Vogt in the early days in secret?
Well, there were other sort of clandestine attempts in the past from some of the ministers in the 60s, 70s, and on, where there were meetings held, but it would always kind of hit a dead end because, and this is your interview, but I just want, it seemed
so
like
how was that for
after
you?
the split occurred, it just seemed like the other side became demons. And they're, the people that were directly affected and their students, so that was 2 generations of ministers, would tend to talk about the other organization as though they don't teach the science of mind, they're whatever. And when we began to explore this and began to have conversations, we began to see that no, that's not true.
We had a consultant that helped us change our name and brand us. And his name was Chuck Pettis, and he was a Buddhist out of one of the islands off of Seattle. Sweet, sweet human being. He actually built this.
And actually one of the top branding consultants in the country. Yeah.
He built this fantastic property that's still over there. It's a heritage farm of some kind. But what we did was, when we were changing our name, we were both in the process of doing that at the same time. And I can remember Chuck Pettis first went to United and did their branding map for them. And the branding map is their what they believe and all of the different things that they hold as values. And so he had the branding map already for them. And then he came and did ours.
Well, we sort of talked them into letting us come to the next meeting of their thing with Chuck Pettis.
Yeah.
And then we got on board as well.
So then we got Chuck to come and do a branding map of International. So Chuck comes and does the branding map of International. And when he finishes with the branding map, he had a meeting with us. And where I can remember to this day sitting in that room. And he said, I want to show you something. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, look at this. Here's the United branding map. Here's International's branding map. And I'll tell you, if one of them had been a transparency and you put it over top of the other one, the only thing different would have been spelling mistakes. It was that close as to who we are. And he said, you guys are absolutely nuts. You're the same people. And so it was like, that's good.
Sometimes you need to hear it from an outsider, right?
Well, exactly. And, so it came across really strong, and that was so obvious. And it was just the way that we did business that was different. It was the way that we had our setups to do it, what our structures looked like. But our business plan was pretty much identical. It was the structure of how we administered it that was the big difference on the whole thing.
Okay, so in 2011 and 2012, we had the historic vote at 2011 in San Diego to accept the documentation for the integration, the merger, and then in 2012 in New Orleans, the election of officers and so forth. So tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you and your early days as the spiritual leader at Centers for Spiritual Living.
We did something in 2010, 2011, 2012 that had never been done in our movement before. And that is that we defined what it is that we believed and put it on paper and took it to vote. And the most powerful thing that we had was that document, our organizational design model, and our principles and our values. And the reason why it's so important is because up until that time, no spiritual leader or no president, which were equivalent positions in the two organizations, would dare stand up and say, this is what we believe. That, you could follow the principles, but you couldn't go out and say, spiritually, we do not believe in separation, or whether you're talking about gender-specific items, whether or not you're talking about sexual preference items, whether or not, you name it. It was really, really hard to declare it as the leader at that time. But once we had that organizational design model voted on in 2011, it was clearly written out. This is what we believe. And no longer could we hide behind the fact that a small group of people weren't in support of gay rights. So therefore, it wasn't right as the leader of this organization to speak out in favor of them, because it was written in black and white that this is what we support. And the biggest transformational difference that we had by putting the ODM together is we gave teeth to the leadership and a clarity and an understanding, an uncommon understanding of what we stood for in the world and who we stood with. And so suddenly what happened was it allowed for things like the white papers and the essays that you see written by so many of the committees that I helped form to be able to become present and published in our movement. And when the flock comes in and says, oh, that's not what I believe, then it's really clear. Have you read the ODM recently? Look at the ODM. This is what you said you agreed when you voted for it. If you didn't vote for it, and I would never do this, but basically you're saying, if this doesn't fit you, then maybe you should become a Lutheran or whatever it happens to be that you came from.
Yeah, we can edit that out. So after New Orleans, in the aftermath of New Orleans, as the new organization now is formed, it has leadership council and positions, or important committees are being filled and everything. Tell us about how that was for you in terms of that role of the spiritual leader and
they were undefined. We had a president, a spiritual leader, 3 directors, and we were so top-heavy that we kept capsizing. And it was so clearly obvious that it was painful to watch it happen. But it had to go through the process to be able to rub some of that off effectively, to be able to make it work and to be able to make it efficient. Mm-hmm. And so, the design team did a brilliant job on putting together a lot of things, but the actual structure, we compromised in several things to get the integration to take place. We had to, and otherwise we'd still be talking about integration. So the thing is that it became obvious to us that we needed to have these compromises, and it's just the luck of the draw that I was spiritual leader that showed up at the time when all this transformational change had to be healed, and we had to look at it. And we had to start looking at things, say, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this is why. And a lot of people had a vested interest and investment in what was being said and how it was being said. So the first couple of years of Centers for Spiritual Living was tumultuous. And therefore, what happened to it was as we know, it begins with us. So when the leadership, the core, is in tumult, then you can pretty much guess that the body becomes tumultuous as well. And so it was a constant dealing with this tumultuousness going on in the field. And we had people who rose in pissed offivity about certain things, and they couldn't find their way to fit it in. We had members that were wondering what was happening. And at the same time, we were broaching it at the time where the big myth came out. And the big myth is this, is that United took over International, and that was from the International side. And from the United side, it's International took over United, because you're offering new things. Well, that's just the way International used to do it, or that's just the way United used to do it. And it was a blend. We were trying to find the best practices of both. And so we were in the midst of this fire that was going on for the first literally 3 or 4 years that was happening. And it was stressful. You know, I remember on more than one occasion going home and saying, I'm going to quit. And I remember on more than one occasion Deb saying, don't be stupid, you don't quit. And that's and continuing on, you know. But those were the times, you know. And there was a lot of triangulation that was going on, a lot of talking around. And I tried my best not to involve myself in triangulation. And I found myself in situations when I wouldn't involve myself in triangulation, being cut out of conversations. The triangulation continued. I just wasn't part of it, which didn't do us any good at all because I didn't know what was going on half the time. So we had that going on at the time.
Yeah.
And so we forged ahead with that and evolved very, very quickly. And I think that it's important to note what a lot of corporate trainers like Dorian have told me is that when you integrate two corporations together, generally speaking, there isn't much success for one of those corporations that take place. Usually something happens and there's a huge fracture and then it goes on like business as normal. And I'll tell you is that we've held this together as a united international thing. I have in my pocket the original 6 things that I thought were important that I gave in 2012. And integration was one of them. And we have come miles in the last 8 years. I always said it would take 2 ministerial generations to actually happen. And a ministerial generation is 5, 6, 7 years where you begin to get the turnovers and that sort of thing. And I'd say we're right on track with it right now. We have a foundation right now which I've never seen before. I never saw it in international before. We have such a cohesive leadership council. And with our new executive director, Sonia Byrne, who was the perfect person at the perfect place, just like Steve was the perfect person at the perfect time. What we're finding is we're finding this gelling that's coming together. And it is so sweet to see this actually turn out to be something wonderful. You know, I thought we burned the stew for a while, and it turned out it just needed that smoky flavor to be good, you know. And it's really there now. It's happening right now. And that's how come to this weekend, or it's such a crucial time for our organization. Absolutely crucial. Because we have the opportunity right now to set this and complete it. And it's not near as fragile as it once was. But don't kid yourself. There's still fragility that's out there. And we have to be aware of it. Doesn't mean we have to coddle it. Doesn't mean that we have to babysit it. But we have to be aware that it's there and clear in our own consciousness as to where we're going. How'd we get on this one?
I don't know. I just throw them up and you hit them out of the park. Tell me, in your 2 terms, what are you most proud of?
Exactly what I just talked about. Yeah, everybody thinks that the big accomplishment was integration in my career, and it wasn't. The big accomplishment is the love and the kindness, the compassion, and the understanding that we've developed, that we've grown into. And that's the truth from when I was president of International, too. The big accomplishment wasn't the name change or branding. The big accomplishment was having people being aware that they love each other and that they come in contact and that we're family of choice. Lloyd Klein once said to me, when I was early in ministry, Reverend Lloyd was one of my mentors, and Deb and I and his wife Wendy were out for dinner one night, and I said I hated something. And he turned to me and he said, Ken, we're religious scientists. We don't hate anything. and I tattooed that on my soul. And that's what we need to tattoo on our souls. We don't hate anything. What we do is we transform everything. And we do it through love and compassion and understanding. And that's the calling that we're being called to right now. Because, as we change, and tomorrow night I've got the third of my trilogy of seafaring stories, but that as we change and as we move into the turn of something new and something fresh, it demands that we be new and fresh. And it demands that we understand where we're going and what we're doing and see a larger picture rather than the smaller one. Because we might very well get back into inner conflict and inner fighting again. And we have to know that that's just the growing pains of becoming a collective consciousness that can transform the world. What I just shared with you about the growing pains, in the midst of them, sometimes I didn't believe they were growing pains. Sometimes I was frightened what I believed they were. And now that I see them in hindsight, I can see how it was perfect the way that it unfolded. Has anybody had that experience? But at the time, in the present moment, I might have been abrasive, at least to myself. I don't think any of you even noticed it. So, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Be more patient. New thought is a cutting-edge teaching. It always has been a cutting-edge teaching. And I've given this rant before. Somehow or other, we think that we're supposed to be mainstream. And so, we go to our centers and we see that there's only 100 people at it or whatever, and we think, oh my God, I'm not doing good enough. And it destroys our self-esteem, which we know. But the truth of the matter is we're a cutting-edge teaching. And the goodness that it's put out into the world is it's totally transformed the world. The world is a different place because of that. All you have to do is know what we believe and know that we have torn down the Berlin Wall. We have brought together nations. We've made connectivity with people. We've brought love to the forefront. We've lowered the death rate or the mortality rate of children. And we've done it through our teaching and what we believe and what we hold to be true. And we'll continue to do it as long as we continue to be a cutting-edge teaching. We're not mainstream. Something new, this is happening to us all the time. There'll be a new thought, new idea, and there's nothing new in God, but there's a new recognizing and a new understanding, a new appreciation. And when that new appreciation is accepted, everything grows and bloops out according to what happens with it. And as humanity, we have a tendency to fight against that new idea or that new thought. And of course, what we believe in is the development and the embrasure of that new thought to be able to transform and get a new experience that comes from it. And that's the change that it's made. When Deb and I first started the center in Kelowna, the first class we gave was in a grade 3 classroom. And I walked in, coming out of California, back into Canada, thinking I was going to deal with all these people who didn't have a clue. And I'll tell you what, all those grade 3 kids knew already, because all the affirmations that I was prepared to teach were on handwritten posters that were up on the valance of the ceiling. There's a new consciousness that's constantly coming forward, and the only thing that can freeze it in place is when the mind says, I liked it the way it was before and I don't want the new way to come and happen. And we've seen enough of that in our lifetime, and we don't need to do it anymore. And we're in that crux place right now again, where it's showing up and showing itself. And not just within our organization of CSL, it's happening in unity, it's happening in all the denominations. By the way, we're close with unity now too. But it's all happening, and on top of that, it's happening in the nation, it's happening in the world, it's happening everywhere. It's not a bad thing. What it is it's humanity learning not to be stuck in the past and to move into something freeing in the future. Is most of us have been trained that as we think, it's done unto us, and that we can transform the world through our own inner thinking and the transformation of our own consciousness, which is true, which I just finished talking about. But I think that there's a bigger idea that's being birthed here. And the bigger idea is that being a teaching that touts and talks about we are one, we have to realize that we are part of a collective, and that it's not just the transformation of the individual, talking about each of us, it's also the transformation of the collective societal, and that the awakening that's taking place within ourselves needs to be expressed in a new way into the world around us in order to be able to impress the larger consciousness, which is still who we are. I think to a large degree, we say we are one, and my name's Ken Gordon, and I'm an individual, and I'm separate from everything else. And I think what we're doing is we're dawning on an understanding and appreciation that everybody in this room is part of a cellular dance and connectivity that is necessary for us to expand and to be able to grow. And to do that, what we need to do is we need to broaden Dr. Holmes's beautiful statement of there's a power in the universe that's greater than I am and I can use it, to there's a power in the universe that is greater than I am and it can use me. And allow ourselves to be receptive to this power so that what we can do is take it to the next stage, which basically means that we begin to move and change and transform things through a collective, not through an individual. And so I think the future is that we're on the cutting edge of that right now. And we will achieve it, and it will take place. And when it does, we will add another 500,000 enlightened souls to the collective consciousness that transforms the world. And we'll see a big difference in the world, and we'll take the next step. And then what will happen to us is something new will come along, and we'll fight and scramble around it again.
If you were to just say to this group and to the people that are going to see this video, that are watching, in a couple of sentences, what would you like them to carry away from this sharing?
I think when I look back on the 21 years I've been in upper leadership of Science of Mind, religious science, no matter what name it came under, because the name is secondary. You know, we're talking about a collective consciousness. We're not talking about an organizational consciousness. This is the best vehicle that we have, and I bless it and I honor it. But it's not. My job is not to keep the vehicle alive. My job is to keep the consciousness alive. I would say that we have to be constantly aware that we're growing into that collective. And that we have to constantly honor the fact that that collective is going to have every shape, every color, everything, every good, bad, and whatever you want to put in between it, that's going to be mixed into it, and that it's all spirit. And that when we ground ourselves in that understanding and that knowledge and that knowing, it no longer can hurt us. It can only help guide us to a greater appreciation. And that greater appreciation is the unity of life. Whether it be human or whether it be mineral, plant, animal. And that greater appreciation is something that we can begin to really work on within ourselves by watching where we get angry and where we get upset, and understand that that is fear-based. And that whenever I find I'm mad, or I'm angry, if I go one layer below, I usually find that I'm frightened of something. And whenever I look at what I'm frightened of, I realize, as the Course in Miracles said, that there's only two base emotions, fear and love, and that fear is the absence of love. And to begin to apply love to it. And we also have to break our habit of running away and withdrawing and not participating, thinking that we don't have any power. And I think that that's a huge one. William Meader, who is head of Theosophical Society, said there's 3 kinds of people in the world. There are those people who say, this is the way I like it, this is the way it's got to be, this is the only way it ever will be, this is the way it used to be, and that's the way I want it right now, and if I don't get it, I'm going to fight for it. There's the other group on the other end, which are the people that say, I have no power over the world whatsoever, nothing. That's, my opinion does not matter. The world's going to picture the way it does. And then he said that there's that group in the middle that know that their energy is a cause within the universe itself that can create goodness and bring the collective goodness to bear. He said, those people are who we are. Those people on the outside who don't think they have any effect, they don't have any effect. Those people on the other side, what they do is they fight. We are the people that are going to transform the world. And it's important that we remember that in every deed and everything that we think about. And if you're like me, and when you don't succeed and you have your little rant or your little temper tantrum, forgive yourself and begin again the next minute to try to do it again better next time. Stuff that used to take me 3 years to get over, now I can get over in 3 minutes. I'm trusting that stuff someday I won't have in the first place, so I won't have to get over it. I love you. Do things out of love. Serve to fulfill yourself, to fill your own cup. Don't serve because somebody wants you to. You have a calling in life, and that calling is out picturing the minute that you open your mind to allow yourself to serve humanity without consideration of some kind of return that comes back again. Bless you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Good time.
This is Jim Van Cleve, and he's the president of the Archives Foundation. Thank you.
Let me just read this to you. It's a Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation Special Recognition Award. This special recognition is given to a person who exhibits a life of love and dedication to preserving and presenting the philosophy of Ernest Holmes, the teaching of Science of Mind. The Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation presents this award to Reverend Dr. Kenneth Gordon, presented February 16th, 2020.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Very good.
I will honor this. I'll put it on my my wall of pride. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kenn. Thank you, Dr. Jim. That was truly making history. And as I was sitting back there, I know the archives were here to preserve, protect, and present science, mind, history, and philosophy. What came to me, the word history, it's kind of, what does that even mean? We're here to preserve stories. Isn't that what we heard tonight? We heard these amazing stories. We're here to preserve our stories, so thank you for sharing yours, and both of you. So the Science Mind Archives is really here to preserve our stories for all of us and for generations to come. This philosophy is so important to the world, and to keep getting it out there. That our website is really amazing, scienceofmindarchives.com, all spelled out. All our Wise Sage interviews, we've done 34 Wise Sage interviews to date. Thanks to Dr. Marilyn Leo, Dr. Jim, and Dr. Dorianne and Karen too. You did Dr. Sue Rubens together, didn't you? Yeah. So we have these beautiful videos that we're going to get available on our website because we want to share this with the world. Coming to Golden is really fun, but gosh, We have folks in Africa. We have folks worldwide. We have folks in France, perhaps, that might be interested in seeing some cool stuff like this. So anyways, check out our website. It's really important.